Okay, so for today's discussion, we'll be talking about chapter 2, which is about the fundamental economic concepts. So our objectives is to understand, of course, the basic and fundamental concepts in economics, and to determine and understand the four most important concepts, namely demand and supply, marginal analysis, net present value, and the meaning and measurement of risk. So if you may notice, these topics are really not new to you. So for example, the demand and supply and also the marginal analysis is or you've already encountered this in your microeconomics class, maybe in your high school or your senior high school. While the net present value and the risk, you might have encountered it already in your financial accounting, diba, or your financial management. So these topics are not new. However, we are still going to discuss just the fundamentals or the theory in relation to economics. So let's start with briefly identifying or briefly understand what demand and supply is. So when you say demand, of course, it indicates the purchase intentions. So when you say purchase, of course, it relates to the buyers, diba? It determines the ability of the buyers to be able to buy a certain product, or it shows their willingness or capabilities to consume a certain product, while the supply indicates the supply intention. So this side already pertains to the supplier. So does the supplier have the ability and capability to give what its consumer needs, or diba, or sa mga demands sa mga consumers? So that is basically what demand and supply is. Now, if you can remember, the point where your demand and supply meets is your equilibrium point, diba? So your equilibrium point indicates your equilibrium price and your equilibrium quantity. So if you can remember, let's try to draw a graph here. So if you can remember, diba, ana man na inyong graph. So this is the price and this is the quantity. So, diba, you have the, let's change first. You have the graph for your supply. So this is your supply curve, and then you have the graph for your demand. Say your demand is this one. So this is your demand. Now, the point where those things, or this point, kung asa mag-meet imuhang supply and demand, so that is your equilibrium price. So equilibrium price is kani, mo ni dinhi imong EP, equilibrium price, and then same would go sa imuhang quantity, diba? So that is how you determine your equilibrium price. Now, there are factors that affect your equilibrium price. So you have your intrinsic use value, and you have intrinsic use value, production cost, and the input scarcity. So when you have intrinsic use value, of course, unsa ang kagamiton sa imuhang product, no? So for example, your product is really, it doesn't have a high intrinsic use value, so of course you would expect demand would be lower, diba? And then supplier would not want to supply your product, and so on and so forth. So this equilibrium point nimo is ma-move na siya, or ma-shift na siya. Now, next factor affecting is your production cost. So of course, if your production cost is too high, the supplier might not want or might not have the capacity to supply because of the high production cost. So kung mora ni ang budget ni supplier, mahal man naman pamalito nun. So instead of creating per se 100 pieces of that certain product, ang mabuhat na lang ni supplier is 75, or ang mapalit sa iyang budget is makabuhat like 75. So again, it causes a shift in your equilibrium price. And then another is input scarcity. So this time is na kay shortage sa imong raw materials, di ba? So since gamay ra man imong raw materials, so gamay ra sa jud ang imong mabuhat. Thus again causing a shift to your equilibrium price. So those are some of the factors that can affect your equilibrium price. Now let's move on to the diamond water paradox and the marginal revolution. So when we say diamond water paradox, you take note of this statement, or remember this statement, or try to answer this statement. Why should consumers bid low offer prices for something as essential as water while bidding high offer prices for something as frivolous as diamonds? So ngano daw ang tao, di ba, is mo bid sila og low prices for something that is useful as water, di ba? Tubig gud siya, so gamit yun kay siya. So, di ba, di dapat nga ang tao is mas ganahan mong offer og high prices anang niya kay tungod kay gamit siya. While on the other hand is arin noon sila nag-offer og high price sa diamond nga di jud siya necessity, di ba? It's just a want but not a need. So, anong mas mahal man ang diamond kaysa sa tubig? So, to answer this diamond water paradox, you need to distinguish between marginal use value or marginal utility and the total use value. So, di ba, when we talk about water, we know man good na water is abundant in nature, di ba? It is abundant in comparison to your diamonds. So when we talk about diamonds, there are a lot of costs incurred in getting your diamonds, like sa pag-mining, in terms of mining, di ba, transportation, in search for places where there are where you can mine diamonds. So there are a lot of costs that you can incur with creating diamonds. Well, on the other hand, sa water, yes, you can incur a lot of cost, pero water is abundant, diba? So there are even technologies right now that can convert seawater to drinkable water. So that is why ang si consumer is iyang initial thought is daghan man gud ang supply og tubig, diba? So even if it is essential, since it is abundant in nature, that is why low prices ang ma-offer, ang willing i-offer ni consumer, while balipod sa kang diamond. So with the marginal utility, when we say manggod marginal utility or marginal use value, it refers to the additional value of the consumption of one more unit. So the greater the utilization, the lower the use value remaining. So since water has a lot of use man, diba? So diba ang water is magamit din sa pangligo, panglaba, pangbubo sa tanom. So every time na mo use daw ka sa water or sa kana nga product, kana nga product is ang iyahang value, use value kay magka lower pod. So meaning dili siya unlike sa imong total, or dili siya mo unlike sa imong total use value, di ba nga, it refers, if you say total use value, is it refers to the totality use yun sa imong product. So its total use is not usually what determines man, or what motivates the buyer to buy that. It's more on the marginal use man. So that is why water is, or mo siya ang diamond water paradox. That is why consumers are willing to bid low for water tungod kay ang iyang marginal use value for the satisfaction you get in using other things is magkagamay man siya. However, it would differ sad no from case to case basis because per se you are living in a country where water is really scarce. So meaning mas napay value ang water sa imuha, like every drop of water counts. So kana is mabali na pud siya. However, if you are living in a first world country, di ba? So kani siya nga paradox is mo coincide siya or mo it applies or it applies to first world countries no kay tungod again they are abundant in water. So kana na siya, bali-bali na siya, it depends on the situation. So next is let's go to the demand function, or let's talk about the demand. So the demand schedule or demand curve specifies the relationship between prices and the quantity demand, holding constant the influence of all other factors. Diba, if maka-remember mo kaning holding constant the influence of all other factors, this can also refer to as ceteris paribus. Diba? When you say ceteris paribus, mo siya meaning all else are constant. Now, a demand function specifies all these factors that management will consider, including the design and packaging of products, the amount and distribution of the firm's advertising budget, the size of the sales force, promotional expenditures, the time period of adjustment for any price changes, and taxes or subsidies. So these are factors no, that can affect your demand or the company will consider. Now we have this example. So as you can see here, as the price of the pizza decreases, as the price decreases, the quantity of pizza sold also increases. Therefore, you can see here that the relationship of your price and quantity are inverse. Diba? Again, ikaw consumer, diba, mas daghan kag mapalit if barato ang imuhang palitonon. So that is why if you can see here, if tag 50 ang pizza o makapalit sa tag 50 ka buok, but if tag 250 ang pizza is 10 ra ka buok ang imuhang mapalit. So again, remember the demand. In demand, the price and quantity has an inverse relationship. So this is the graph of your demand curve. So it is going down because as mentioned, as your price increases, your quantity decreases. So as your price decreases, di ba imong quantity is nagka-taas po siya. So mani siya ang imong demand curve. So if there is a change in price, so the demand curve can either shift to the left or it can shift to the right. So kana siya, shift to the left and then shift to the right. So there are factors that can affect the shifting, which we'll discuss in the next slide. So before discussing the factors that can affect your demand curve, the factors that can affect demand, let's first talk about these two kinds of goods, substitute and complementary goods. So when we say substitute goods, these are alternative products whose demand increases when the price of your focal product rises. So again, atong bisayaon, if mutaas daw or ang demand sa imuhang substitute good is mutaas daw if ang presyo sa imuhang product is ni taas. Kaya naman, di ba? Remember, this is a substitute good. So, unsa may, let's have an example. So, for instance, rice, di ba? If the product of rice is your focal product, if the product of rice rises, mamahal ang imuhang bugas. You as a consumer would want to buy the substitute good because of course your product is di mahal man siya. So meaning adto ka mo palit sa imong substitute. So instead of rice, let's say magkamote na lang ka, di ba? So ang kamote nimo being a substitute of your rice, its demand increases. So mo na siya ang substitute. While complementary is the opposite. When you say complementary, its movement would be the same with your focal product. So meaning, its demand will decrease when the price of your focal product rises. So when you say, let's say for instance, let's say rice, balik sa rice. If mahal imuhang rice, di ba? Unsa may complementary food, complementary sa rice, let's say sudan, di ba? Kung mahal imuhang kung mahal imuhang rice is dili na kaganahan nga mopalit pod og sudan. Kay of course, mahal man ang rice. So di ka ganahan mopalit og rice. Nya since di mo ka mopalit og rice, di na po ka mopalit og sudan. So meaning ang katong sudan is a complementary good. So kana siya mo siya inyong i-remember ha. So these are the list of factors affecting demand. So you have here, if there is an increase in the price of your substitute good, there is an increase in demand of your product. Again, ang ni-increase ang price man sa substitute good. So meaning, ikaw na imong focal product is mo increase imong demand kay of course substitute good man to nimo. So kung ikaw di ito ang ninda og, let's say ikaw diri ang naninda og kamote, yan increase man ang price sa bugas which is a substitute good. So mo increase imong demand sa kamote, di ba? So inani siya pagbasa, ang kani increase is mo match siya dinhi. Wag kanina sa parenthesis is mo match pud siya sa parenthesis sa other side. So for example, if there is a decrease in the price of complementary goods, there is an increase in the demand of your focal product. So, anaon siya pagbasa. Now, if there is an increase in consumer income levels, of course, your demand will increase because nidako naman ang sweldo sa mga tao. So, instead sa una, ihang paliton ra kay isa ka kilo na bugas kada sweldo, di ba? Pwede nga since nagdako naman niya sweldo, so maka-afford na siya palit og 2 kilo nga bugas. So, di ba? Ina na siya. Next is, there is an increase in the amount of advertising and marketing expenditure. So, of course, your demand will also increase. Kaya nag-advertise man kanida ko man imo ang advertising expenditures. But take note, kani sa next one, if there is an increase in the amount of advertising and marketing by competitors, so ang imuhang competitors ang nag-intensify sa ilang advertising and marketing, so of course your demand will decrease. Kay ato naman sa imong competitors mapalit kay mas grabe man lang advertising efforts. So next, if there is an increase in population, of course demand will increase kay daghan mas napunan man ang mga tao na mopalit. Next, you have if there is an increase in consumer preferences for the goods, there is a decrease in demand. So, what do you mean by an increase in consumer preferences? So, meaning nilahi na ang taste sa imuhang consumers. So, if sa una is ganahan na siya ani nga product o nag-change naman ang iyang increase sa iyang, if sa una is ang iyang ganahan is kanara mga ukay-ukay, di ba niya na ma-increase iyang consumer preference. So gana na siya mga branded clothes, so ikaw nga nanindag ukay-ukay mo decrease ang imong demand. So na siya. Next is the expected future price increases. If the expected future price of the good increases, there is an increase in your demand. So ano man, again take note, the increase is in the future. So, di ba, kung kahibaw ka nga mumahal ang bugas next week, kanus ang makamupalit og bugas next week pa day, di ba dili, di ba mamalit na kag bugas daan karon kay para dili ka abtan og price increase. So that is why ang bugas, if na siya expected future price increase, ang iyang demand pod at present would increase. Now, time period adjustment increases. There is an increase in demand. So, for example, let's say you time period adjustment. When you say time period adjustment, for example, mga seasonal na mga products, di ba? So, kana siya if ang kana siya nga period or kana siya nga product is halino or in season siya ana, mga increase siya in season siya ana, meaning mo increase iyang demand kay in season man siya. Or let's say nga di ba like for instance sa Philippines ang ato ang Pasko is mag-start og September, but technically mag-start og September. So from September to December, di ba diha mo increase ang imong demand. However, there are other countries na ilaha is ika-December na gid sila magsugod og pamalit og mga kwan. So since lesser man ilahang time period, so mo decrease pud ang demand sa ilahang mga Christmas related na mga items. So yun siya. Next is tax subsidies. If tax subsidies on the good increase, there is a decrease in demand. Or if taxes on the good increase, there is a decrease in demand. So nga naman, mas dako naman kag bayaran nga tax, di ba? May increase man yung bayaran nga tax. So meaning si supplier is instead of using the money nga ibayad sa tax to create the product, is dili naman siya makabuhat ana. So ano ba decrease? Or let's change that example. You are the consumer. If mudako ang per se katong excise tax, di ba? Pag katong nabuhat ang excise tax, di ba? Ang sa amin hitabo ni mahal ang mga product, di ba? Ni mahal ang mga soft drinks, mga juice. So meaning ang mga since ni mahal man siya kay tungod na increase in tax, so ang mga tao is tubig na lang, so mga ni-decrease ang demand sa imuhang mga sweetened nga mga drinks, di ba siya? So mana siya ang mga factors. The supply is supply schedule is a list of prices and corresponding quantities that an individual or group of sellers desires to sell at uniform prices, holding constant the influence of all other factors. So, of course, supply is bali sa imuhang demand, no? Ari na imuhang i-think na pud anhi is ikaw si supplier. So, ganiya sa demand, you think of yourself as the buyer. Dire, you think of yourself as the supplier. So, this is your supply curve. Again, if the price increases, your quantity supply also increases. Because, of course, ikaw supplier, di ba? Mahal guna siya. So, ganaan ka maninda pugdaghan na niya. Kasi mahal na siya. So, meaning the relationship of price and quantity is a direct relationship. So, your supply can also shift to the right and can also shift to the your right and to the left. So again, there are factors affecting these shifts, no? So you have here increase in the price of inputs, meaning a decrease in supply. Meaning mo mahal imong raw materials, diba? So man ang decrease imong supply. Increase in the price of unused substitute inputs. So again, there is a decrease in supply. If there are technological improvements, there is an increase in supply. So for instance, manual ka sa una, o niya, nakapalit na mga machineries, so mas daghan na imuhang na produce in a day. Entry of other sellers, of course, would increase the supply. Kaya daghan na mag-suppliers. If there are suppliers disruptions, it is a decrease. If there is an increase in regulatory costs, so there is a decrease in supply. Kaya of course, mas daghan na magbayaran si seller. Then expected future price increases, so there is a decrease in supply. So bali siya ato sa imuhang demand, di ba? So kung si supplier kung si buyer is ganahan siya mamalit while ang presyo is barato pa, si supplier is gana siya magtinda ika-future na kay ato pa man mo dako ang presyo. So at present is gamay pa yang at present is mo decrease pag ang supply kay ato pa man ipagawas ini ka katong kanasang na future price increase. So time period of adjustment lengthens, there is an increase in supply. Then if there are taxes, dako imong taxes, there is a decrease in supply. So as I mentioned a while ago, di ba, at the start, you have your supply and your demand. Thus, the meeting point is your equilibrium point. So next, let's move on to marginal analysis. So marginal analysis is a basis for making various economic decisions that analyze the additional marginal benefits derived from a particular decision and compares them with the additional or marginal cost incurred. Again, when you say marginal, more on additional siya. Kung pila daw imong additional benefits nga makuha if mo incur ka ana nga additional cost. So it has something to do with your cost benefit analysis, no? So it is one of the most useful concepts in microeconomics. So resource allocation decisions typically are expressed in terms of marginal equilibrium conditions that must be satisfied to attain an optimal solution. So if a certain company has this limited resource, diba, and they are to decide on what, let's say, product lines should get these resources. So ilang kanon nga if kani siya nga resource is atong ibutang sa product A, pila ang ihang increase nga mahatag sa product A. If kani siya is atong ibutang sa product B, pila yang increase nga mabuhat sa product B. And then they make comparisons, diba, sa katong benefits nga makuha sa A, B, C, and D sa katong ilahang mga alternatives, diba? So dili mo kami ang imong marginal analysis. So mo to siya, pila ang additional benefits nga makuha nimo given nga mao na imong additional cost nga i-incur. So that is the concept of your marginal analysis. Next, we have your net present value. So your net present value, it is when the net present value is another tool used to evaluate if a certain alternative is good or bad. So kani siya is more on the financial po ni siya nga side, no, sa imong net present value. So when the cost and benefit occur at approximately the same time, the marginal decision rule applies. But many economic decisions require the cost to be incurred immediately to capture a stream of benefits over several future time periods, which is usually the case, diba? Kanang mga isa pa magtukod kag building, diba? Karon ka mo spend pa ka sa pagtukod sa building before pa nimo siya magamit. So instead of using the marginal analysis, what is used is the net present value. So again, the NPV provides appropriate guidance for longer-term decision makers. Thus, sa marginal si marginal is need siya gamiton if diha dayon is ma-determine nimo ang iyahang cost o benefits. Si NPV is nag-incur na kag cost karon pero ang benefits nimo is on a longer term pa. So to get the NPV, it is simply the present value of your future returns minus your initial outlay or pila imong gipagawas. So the present value, kaning pagkuha sa imong present value is nani sa inyong accounting, di ba? If maka-remember mo. So nani mga present value. Tungod, di ba, you are to get the present value because you are estimating kung pila imong future returns, di ba? So for example, in year 1, imong expected returns is at 100,000, year 2, 200,000, year 3, 300,000, and so on and so forth. But per se, for those, let's say, 5 years na imong expected nga future inflow, pila man ang iyang value ana tanan at present. diba? So, mo nang kuha na nimo imong net present value. So, there is a formula for the net present value. I-refresh lang niya ang inyong mga accounting ng mga topics na dito. Minus your initial outlay. So, kung pila imuhang nagasto. So, that is your NPV. So, if you have a positive NPV, meaning na kay return. Kay it is a good investment, di ba? Or it is a good alternative if positive ang imuhang NPV. Now, if negative imuhang NPV, of course, cost-benefit analysis ta, di ba? Mabay ni imuhang benefit nga side, kaniya side. This shows your, or this refers to your benefit. Ang outlay is your cost. So, if negative siya, meaning mas dako ang cost kaysa sa imong benefit nga makuha, di ba? So, meaning, dili siya nindot na alternative, or di siya nindot na option. So, that is your NPV. So, again, for the formula of your present value factor is referring mo sa inyong accounting niya. So, kana siya. So, next we have risk and return, which is, this is the last one, I think. So, when we say risk refers to the potential variability of outcomes from a decision alternative. So, it can be measured whether by standard deviation, if sa inyong BA 319, I don't know if you already have BA 319, but you are, or sa inyong statistics, diba, you are taught that standard deviation is a measurement of risk, or it is a measurement of absolute measurement of risk, while your coefficient of variation is a relative measure of risk. So, of course, diba, if there is a risk, or if there is a return rather, nasa gidnay risk. So, there is a positive relationship between, or there is a positive relationship that exists between risk and required rates of return. Meaning, the higher the risk, the higher the return. So, kung mas risky na imong buhaton nga per se investment, mag-expect pud ka og higher return. Now, if you are investing in something with a lower risk, meaning lower pud ang iyahang return. So, mo na siya ang concept sa imuhang risk and return. Now, kani siya nga concept is, kani siya sa imuhang risk and return is the topics here, or in order how to get the risk, diba, is deeply discussed in detail sa imuhang statistics, or PET 19, mo siya sa this statistical analysis to, wherein you are taught how to get the probability, you are taught how to get the expected value. When you say expected value, is mo na siya imuhang weighted average, no? You are taught about how to get the variance and the standard deviation. So, those things have formulas, which dili na nato itamog dig deeper sa formulas dili, no? Because again, as I mentioned, those topics are discussed in detail sa inyong other subjects. So, dinhi lang, when you are making economic decisions, you need to take into consideration the risk involved. Kaya dili man gid na mawala. So, there should be proper risk assessment. So, ang application ato inyong mga computations is ari na mo kami sa economics. So, for instance, if this alternative is chosen, unsa man ang risk nakaakibat ana niya. Then, if alternative B, unsa man ang iyang risk, and so on and so forth. So, which alternative should we choose given na mauni ang risk, mauni ang makuha na return, and so on and so forth. So, diha, maapil na siya sa imuhang maapil na siya as a factor when you are to evaluate your alternatives. So, mon ang gamit sa imuhang risk and return. Same would apply to your NPV, to your marginal analysis. So, those things are used for you, or they are used in order for you to help evaluate your alternatives when you are making decisions, diba? So, you decide pila tong makuha nga total profit ani niya. Then, if we add if we pila to ang marginal profit, average profit, diba? So na siya nga kana nga mga concepts asa ang mas higher og NPV. So kana siya kato nga mga concepts, they are discussed in detail sa inyong other subjects, but again they have applications to managerial economics in terms of decision making. So mauna na siya ang sa imuhang second na chapter. So that ends chapter 2.